Good morning, YouTube. Tired Metalhead Weatherman here. Hopefully you guys are doing well. So, in this one, we're going to be covering today's slight risk. Yesterday, of course, it was happening too early for me to go live. This might be a similar deal today, so this video might be all I can do for you right now. But as far as the slight risk is concerned, we have two areas. We have this one towards the Great Lakes. This one is more noted for wind and hail threat, albeit there is a 2% tornado threat. But also the main area of interest, and this is going to be earlier in the afternoon. This is going to be more so towards the northeast where there's a slight risk, and the hazard risk are going to be both tornadoes and wind. So the areas in particular that we're looking at in the northeast stretches all the way north of even Portland, Maine, all the way as far south as maybe Northern Virginia and areas in between. So DC, Baltimore, Philly, New York, Springfield, Boston, Albany, and many others are in this slight risk here. Then also this slight risk here, of course, we're stretching all the way into the Twin Cities, a little further back towards central Minnesota, all the way towards central Wisconsin, the bulb of Wisconsin, as I like to call it, and then also Green Bay, just outside of there, we have you in that slight risk. Not to say that areas like Duluth, Des Moines, Omaha, Sioux Falls, and Milwaukee can't get severe weather either. Same can be said for Louisville, Cincy, Burlington, Binghamton, and Richmond, it looks like. Also Charleston too. I'm trying to make sure I'm including as many of you guys as I can. Also, we have these two marginal risk areas here from Casper over towards Cheyenne, or just outside of Casper and Cheyenne. Then also Pueblo, Colorado, Garden City, and others. So main threats, of course, wind and hail, dominant threats, especially over here further off towards the Great Lakes. Tornado threat, pretty small area right here. And then, of course, as we mentioned, this area is going to be the main point of interest as far as that's concerned. Wind and hail threat is going to be prevalent across these other two marginal risk areas. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the parameters here as a whole. So this is looking towards early afternoon hours. Over here towards New Hampshire and Vermont, there's a nice little streak that develops right here. But it's a little bit more to the south of that where things are more interesting. We do have a decent tornado sounding right here at this point by 19Z. This is right near the Boston area. And this is around probably about maybe 1-2 o'clock-ish. But there's some pretty good pretty good parameters here as a whole. Low level soundings look good. So mainly looks like this is going to be a linear threat more so than anything else. Supercell parameters are not incredible, but notable enough to where we could get a decent sounding out of this at the very least. Then as we go later into the day here, we do eventually start to see the D Cape go up. So eventually we could see a round or two possibly of severe weather. In either case, it's going to be happening too early for me to cover this, so or at least cover this live. So anyone that's looking for that, I apologize. It's just part of the work, part of the process here. Eventually, we won't have to worry about that, hopefully one day. But anyway, so we go to the west here. We have a very similar look over towards Minnesota here. Storms fire earlier in the day, possibly. Could even see a couple of rounds of storms. Here's a severe sounding right here. D Cape is much higher in this region. The lapse rates are a lot more steep. And then also the significant hail parameters even up at this point. As far as low level shear is concerned, it doesn't look like there's a lot to work with here. But the fact in the matter is, though, the wind and hail threat is going to be pretty notable over here in comparison to the northeast. As far as the setup is concerned over towards, let's say, Wyoming, Colorado, not much to really go off of here kinematically at this time. I think as time goes on, as we go later into this week and into the weekend, might be a different story, but that's another video for another time. Let's go ahead and look at the 500 here. And what we'll see with the 500 is the storm motion with this is going to be mostly an eastward one. You may see a little bit of south southeasterly motion for the Great Lakes, and then maybe even a little bit of east-northeast motion towards the northeast here. But the kinematics over here are a little bit more impressive, obviously. Kinematics do improve here, but the problem is convective inhibition will increase here, and that's what will sort of keep the tornado threat at bay. If there is any sort of low-level jet or shortwave that really starts to ramp up right around the afternoon hours, we could be talking a different story, though. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and take a look at that. Start out with the shortwave altitude, which would be 700 millibars. This is going to be part of that storm system that ends up going into the northeast here. This is by about 17Z. It doesn't really look like a super pronounced shortwave or anything like that. This mainly looks like it would be a linear event. Maybe towards the tail end we could see a little something, but I'm thinking for the most part it's going to be early afternoon. By the time we get to mid-afternoon, this will probably be starting to weaken. And then looking over here, I do see a little something here, but it's not super pronounced to the point where I would say it's a short wave. Both of these are very unimpressive as far as short waves are concerned. Then over towards the western plains, pretty much a similar deal. So unless you're in the northeast here, tornado threat's probably going to be pretty minimal. Wouldn't expect a severe weather outbreak of any kind at this time. Of course, this is early morning. Usually a lot more is revealed during the lunchtime hours. So here's the low-level jet, and this is a big part of the reason why we have that 5% tornado threat across this region. By the time we get into the early afternoon here, we're at about 30 to 40 knots here. Pretty good parameters as far as low-level jets concerned for tornadic potential. And then, of course, across this region here, we're just barely scraping the surface to get to about 20 to 30 knots. So the tornado threat here is going to be pretty low, of course. Low-level jet across the western plains, nothing really to write home about at all, really. So nothing to be concerned with there. So as a whole, pretty much just summarizing what we've already been saying is that northeast needs to look out for the tornadoes. Anything towards Minnesota, towards Twin Cities, maybe more so wind. As far as moisture returns are concerned, storms or not, it's going to be pretty oppressive out here. So this is heading later into the day here. You can actually see a good example of corn sweat developing right here, because this is the Gulf of Mexico moisture flow right here. It's a little bit more dry here, but then you see this little surge to the north here. You have to ask yourself, how is that happening? There's your corn crops. As time goes on, we'll see this end up starting to become a little bit more northerly in its flow. And then, of course, by tomorrow, we'll have to look at another severe threat. So this is where things get a little bit more interesting. As far as this area is concerned, like I said, its lapse rates are pretty impressive at this point. New York isn't New York anywhere to the northeast. Lapse rates aren't going to be that high. You'll be lucky to get up to 6, but around this point, we're getting up to 7s and 8s here by 22Z, which is really steep and really notable at that. In fact, this portion right here, we're looking at 8.1. So the hail threat with this is going to be notable. To put it in perspective for you, the significant hail threat here, anything above 1 is an eye-opener for sure. That's our threshold number, and here are the analogs to go with that. So definitely need to be keeping a close eye on the hail threat. Get those cars in the carport. Definitely would recommend you do so. Now, if other parameters were in place here, I'd be really concerned about this over here towards Wyoming and Colorado here. We know all too well how big the hail can get here. So if we had decent kinematics, decent shear to where we could develop those bigger thunderstorms, hail threat would be absolutely insane with lapse rates like this. So as far as instability is concerned, it's no surprise here. Probably see a lot more intense cape here. And then as far as this region, of course, we already know this is going to be earlier in the morning. We're actually going the full 48 loop here just to save some time because I'm running out of it. But as a whole here, like I said, this area is going to be hot. I'm seeing up to about 3,000 plus easy, maybe even a couple of 4,000s here, which is crazy to see here. And there you go, severe sounding. But look at that cape here, almost 5,500 joules a kilogram. We're not far off from it. And then as far as the mix layer is concerned, well over 4,000 as well. Crazy lapse rates again. Even the 3 cape is really high. That's the 3 kilometer cape basically. So like I said, it's loaded out here. Interestingly enough, there's still a little bit of instability over here, but if inhibition were not to persist, it could be a interesting little scenario, and this could be something I could cover if I were to get home in time. And actually, when I look at this, it seems like the inhibition is a little bit weaker here, so may have something. So we'll see what happens. But as time goes on here, we'll see the cape fizzle out, of course, by tomorrow, and then, of course, another severe event to cover. Bulk shear, pretty much a similar deal. Letting my map load. I'm not even giving it a chance here. But like I said, most of that, most of the greatest areas of shear here are going to be more so towards the early afternoon. As we get later into the evening, it's like a couple areas off the coast that could be of interest, but outside of that, not a lot to work with here. Pretty similar deal across this part of Minnesota here in Wisconsin. So no surprises there. Last thing to look at here, of course, is what the radar could look like. So this is towards the early afternoon. We're going to start out with the Great Lakes. And here comes those storms coming in towards the south-southeast here. And interestingly enough, it's later in the evening when these storms start to go. So this could limit some of the severe threat. But even so, parameters are still more than sufficient. So I might cover this one, but I don't know about the northeast. If it happens too early, obviously I'm going to be stuck at work. So there's that. But, oops, a little too far ahead now. So here we go, looking around. Actually, this is forming a little later than expected right now, according to HRRR. Just a little bit later, but I think it's still going to be a little too early. Maybe the tail end of this line I could catch, maybe. But outside of that, I don't really think I'm going to be able to cover a large portion of this event. I'm probably going to miss a lot of it. Well, we'll see if we end up going live today. It all depends on what time the storms fire. Yesterday, the storms fired even earlier than what it was expected, so it's a little bit of a wild card there, but we'll see what happens, of course. But to anyone that's still watching the video at this point, you're awesome. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you found it useful, you know what to do. Smash that like button, decimate the subscribe button, and obliterate that share button. Try to get this info out to as many people as we can. But anyway, this has been Tyler Metalhead Weatherman. I'll see you guys in the next video. You guys take care and have a nice day.